That's right. They do not trust the government. It's harder to abuse the people. If 9 of the 13 can agree, then probably it means it's a good law and we can do this. But it's not just about the number 9. It's about why the number 9. So at this time, there are 3 regions of the country. There's New England, which is New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. Vermont is not yet a state. There's the middle states, or the mid-Atlantic states, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We could probably put Delaware in with them, even though Delaware does have more slavery than they do. And then there are 5 southern states: Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. What is 5 from 13?
8.
8. If the South joins forces, they can block any law they want to block. They've got the votes. Essentially, they have veto power. Why did they create a system where the South specifically has veto power? What's the South afraid of? They're already concerned. They can already look at this and say, you know, we're outnumbered. There's more northern states than there are southern states. There are 8 of them and there are 5 of us. We better create a system in which those people can't tell us what to do down here. So even in these early groups, they're already looking ahead and seeing the need to rig the system. Now, why would the North be okay with that?
Some degree.
Yeah, they want the South, but also is the North anti-slave? No, really. For them, they may say it'd be better if we didn't have it, but they're not out to end slavery. That's not an issue for them. They don't care about the enslaved persons. And so for them, they're like, yeah, that's fine. Either we agree to this or not. If we don't agree, we probably shouldn't do it. Because they're more focused on the can we get united part and work together than they are about these other things. To change the articles, you need all 13 states to agree. That is almost guaranteed to never happen. So they made it almost impossible to change the articles, which is why when they changed the Constitution, and when they wrote the Constitution and changed the articles, you can argue they did all of that illegally. And they just make up the rules as they go along. And we'll talk about why that is later on. So again, they are intentionally making a difficult government to change. Again, that's officially how long it lasted. If 2 states are fighting, it has no real authority to step in there, what's called interstate, whether it's commerce or something else. The world does not respect this government. It shouldn't. If individual states are negotiating trade deals for themselves, that doesn't seem like a very strong government to try to deal with. There are a lot of complaints already. The British, according to the Treaty of Paris in 1883, agreed to get their soldiers off of our land. They didn't. There's still British soldiers up here in the Great Lakes region on American soil, in British forts. And the Americans are like, get them out of there. We're mad at you. And the British are like, come on. You gonna do this again? The British agreed to pay back the Americans for freeing their slaves. So we're going to pay you back for damages, and we're doing that either. So a lot of issues the British have agreed to do, and they're not doing it. And the Americans are shaking their fists and saying, you're supposed to do this. And the British are like, you don't have any power. You can't make us, so we're not going to do it. And did the American force them to do it? The Americans forced them to do it? No, they didn't have any power. That's exactly right. Exactly where the border is, that's still up for debate and not really resolved anywhere. This whole thing about Canada, with Florida down here and Canada up in the north, a little unclear. Basically, the Americans, though, are kind of cut off in the Gulf of Mexico, not able to use that. The Americans want to be able to trade wherever they go, but the British say, nah, we'll put some restrictions on you. And again, the Americans complain, but not much to do with it. By the way, the Americans still, their leading trading partner is Great Britain. And in fact, they're going to make most of their money in the early years off of goods coming in from Great Britain. So it is dominating the American economy, needing to trade with Britain. John Adams actually goes to England in 1784 and meets the king. And the king is pretty insulting to Adams, as representing the United States, to say, you got nothing. Get out of here. The U.S. does make an agreement with Spain about using Mississippi, but ultimately it didn't really work, and it goes away, so we worry about that. So whatever successes there were weren't really all that good. All right, so when people ask the question, what did it do successfully? The answer is it dealt with the land successfully. So these ordinances we're about to talk about, all of them are about the western lands. And the western lands refers to the land between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains. This is the western lands we're discussing. So all these ordinances deal with them. So the first issue is that these colonies, now states, claim to own a bunch of this land already. And there are competing claims. Connecticut and Virginia claim to own Michigan. Virginia claims to own everything. Okay, so there are all these weird competing claims, and that's not going to work. So the states agree to give over those lands to the United States. Officially, these western lands, exactly where the border is of Virginia and Pennsylvania, that needs to get nailed down. But basically, the Appalachian Mountains is the western border of the 13 colonies, now states. And the lands on the other side of the mountains, somewhere in there, now belong to the United States. And so it'll be the U.S.'s job to populate those areas. And so this first ordinance says, we're going to divide that land up into chunks. Up to 10 chunks. Now, for nerds, this allows them to play around. Chief nerd is Thomas Jefferson. And so he literally gets out a map and draws his own lines and makes up names for what he wants to call these states. This is his Minecraft. Okay, he's in there just building his world. Okay, so the world of Metropolitan, that's the state of Metropolitan. We don't have that. Okay, so he does that. That literally happens. And so what they say is that we're going to divide them up into these areas, whatever they're going to be, whatever shape they're going to have, whatever name they're going to have. And they are going to be territories who can then apply for statehood when their free population equals the free population of the smallest state. The smallest state is Delaware in population at the time. So when the population of the Ohio Territory equals the population of Delaware, it can then ask to become a state. Now, anybody can ask to become a state, doesn't mean you're granted statehood. The government has the right to say no, and they will on several occasions. All right, well, now we know how to become a state. How do you actually sell the land to get the people in there to get that population up to become a state? Well, that's what the Ordinance 785 does. It takes those states and cuts them into even smaller chunks based on acreage. And they have names like sections and townships and quarter sections, but we're narrowing it down to a basic farm is 40 acres. And a quarter section is 160 acres, and 160 acres is a half mile by half mile squared. And 40 acres, therefore, is a quarter mile by quarter mile squared. But that becomes the way of doing this. And an acre, by the way, is 208 point something feet. You can round it to 208 if you want to, or 209. So 208 feet this way, 208 feet that way, that's an acre. You get 40 of those, you can farm that land and live off of it. If you had more, you can do more. So they cut it up into these chunks, and they're going to sell it relatively cheap. $1 an acre is not a lot of money. But who wants to buy an acre in Illinois? How are you going to live on an acre? I got a summer garden. We're going to have food this summer. What about the winter? What about every time? So you need more than an acre. Do farmers have $40 in their pockets? No. So the problem is not the cost per acre, it is the number of acres needed to actually be successful. So if the farmers who want to move there can't afford it, who's going to go out there and buy that land? And what would rich people do with a farm in Ohio? Not really. Rich people, when they buy up a bunch of cheap land, they're not going to live on that land. It's an investment. They're doing what we call, there's the map. So there's Thomas Jefferson's drawing. Look at that state line right there. Why? Why this sliver of Michigania in what is now Wisconsin?
Michigan's still 2 parts.
Yeah, but why this sliver right here? Why would he do that? Because he can, that's why, because he's just making lines on a map. Okay? And then this is the one that's also included in your book. This is the cutting up into the smaller section, the smaller section, the smaller section. You can see how small it is there. If you want to build a town, do it in, an acre or a half acre. If you're going to do it that way. But you can't really farm in a town like that. So that's how they cut this thing up. The idea that rich people would buy up the land not to live on it, not to settle it, not to farm it, but simply as an investment is called speculation. They're speculators. They're speculating that they can buy cheap land that they don't need, hold on to it, and in the future sell it for way more money. They didn't have to do any work. All they did was buy cheap, sell high, made a bunch of money. Nothing wrong with that. That's part of capitalism. How does it help out people who want to be farmers if all the land is gobbled up by rich people?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. How does it help a territory that wants to be a state if the people who own your land don't live in your territory? It doesn't. So immediately this failed. This easy way of buying land didn't really work, and so they said, well, that didn't really work. Let's try this one more time. So they kind of scrapped that. It's a little weird all the way this plays out, but they kind of scrapped it and say, let's get rid of the 10 territory idea. Let's do something else. And so if you look at this map, you really have 4 corners of the country. You have the northeast and the southeast and the southwest and the northwest. What's called the old Northwest. Northwest University is in a suburb of Chicago. This is the old Northwest. And the Northwest Ordinance, something you probably need to know for the exam, cuts the land into 3 to 5 territories. It's going to be 5. Those 5 are Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, not Minnesota. Those are the 5. So it's north of the Ohio River, south of the Great Lakes, east of the Mississippi River, west of the Appalachian Mountains. That's the Northwest. It can be cut up into as many as 5. It will be 5. Those populations can apply for statehood when they get 60,000 people. So that whole will be the same as Delaware goes away, be 60,000 people. And for the first time in American history, not state history, but United States of American history, in that region, there will be officially freedom of religion and no slavery. Now, states can do whatever they want to about slavery and religion. The United States cannot tell states what to do, but these aren't states. This is a territory. This belongs to the United States. So the U.S. for the first time passes laws over its own land that says, we're going to guarantee freedom of religion and no slavery in that territory. Now, the freedom of religion thing, I think we already understand why they would do that. But why the no slavery in the Northwest Territories?
Just stop it before it starts.
What do you say?
Let's pick it up.
Okay?
Stop it before it starts, that way it doesn't get big.
Okay?
Well, it's still the north.
It's still the North. The people who are going to move into the Northwest are going to come from the Northeast. They are Northerners. They don't much care for slavery. They're already taking steps against it. If you're running a plantation in Georgia, you're not moving to Wisconsin. That's not for you. You're just going to keep going this direction. In fact, in American history, people just move west on a straight line. The settlers of Massachusetts, New York become the settlers of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and then the Great Plains, and then Northern California up to Washington State. And the Southerners go here across Texas and then settle Southern California. So that is pretty much U.S. history. So if Northerners who already are getting rid of religion and are not big fans of slavery are going to be the ones who move there, they don't want to move there and have somebody come in who brings with them slavery. If we've chosen to get rid of slavery, but a Southerner does move up here into Southern Ohio with slaves, I don't want to compete against a guy who owns slaves. I think that's not fair. Economically, again, he's not necessarily worried about the slaves themselves, but I don't like to compete. That's not something I want to do. And so because they're already moving away from it and they do not want to empower the South, and remember they do have more votes, they can do that. And the South doesn't really care because the South has plenty of states to grow as well that don't exist yet. Alabama, Mississippi, eventually Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, they got their own ways of growing. So you don't have to have a fight over North versus South when both of them have room for growth. So what we see in the Northwest Ordinance is, again, it cuts it up into these 3 to 5, going to be 5, guarantees freedom of religion, guarantees no slavery there, and the assumption is that it'll be pocketed by Northerners, and this is going to be the way they live, and the South will be able to go across the South and live the way they want to, and that's true. That is exactly what plays out here. Everything south of the Ohio River will be slave territory. Everything north will be free. And both of them are satisfied with that. Until the 1800s, then we start fighting over it. Now, there are 2 territories who tried to become states and failed, and then try again and eventually succeed, and they are Kentucky. Kentucky originally was the western part of Virginia. There is no such place in West Virginia yet. That doesn't happen until the Civil War. And Tennessee was the western part of North Carolina. Virginia and North Carolina gave up those claims. There were early attempts. Vandalia and Transylvania were attempts in Kentucky. Franklin was an attempt in Tennessee. But there was too much fraud going on. It was complex and confusing. And the U.S. said, we don't really feel comfortable with what's going on here, so go back and try that again. They did. And so Kentucky becomes a state in 1792. It is the 15th state. In Tennessee, it becomes the 16th state in 1796, because by that time, Vermont is actually joined as the 14th state. When both New York and New Hampshire gave up their claims to it and allowed it to become its own separate thing. But these are the first two territories to become states beyond the Appalachian Mountains. They're not under the Northwest Ordinance, so slavery there, it was much more chaotic. All right, let's kill off this U.S. government. Let's get as close as I can get to it. The U.S. doesn't have any money. It has huge debts. It owes money to people, it owes money to companies, and it owes money to countries, and there's no real way of paying it off. The U.S. cannot raise taxes, but states can. The weird irony of the American Revolution is the Americans pay way more now in taxes to their own state than they ever paid to the British before the Revolution. Because they don't have any money. So states say, we don't have any money and we've got debts, so we're going to tax you to get our money back. So if it was about, I don't want to have to pay taxes are too much, they really lost the American Revolution then. Because they're paying more in taxes. But again, that's not really what they're arguing about. They're arguing about that there are taxes. We agree to them, therefore it's okay to do this. But because the U.S. can't do anything, states and leaders in states start to recognize that this probably isn't going to work out. If the U.S. just sits back and does nothing, then why even have it? And so people like James Madison will start talking about the next group of founding fathers who are probably too young to be major players leading up the revolution. So we'll call them the framers as they write the Constitution. That they start to emerge on the scene and raise some major questions about this. The people who pay taxes are people who own land, and unfortunately those people are quite often farmers who don't have any actual money. But what have the farmers been doing from 1775 to 1781-ish? They've been fighting, not farming. So while you were off fighting for your country, your farm fell into disrepair, or your family operated it but not very well, you didn't really get paid in a lot of cases for fighting because the state who was paying you didn't have any money, or the United States didn't have any money. So you got some IOUs in your pocket that you'll be paid one of these days. And now you've come home to a farm you didn't make a lot of money off of to be told, by the way, since you've been gone, your taxes have gone up to pay for our debts, and your bank still wants its mortgage. So these farmers say, we don't have any money because you didn't pay us, so give us some money. Just print money, give us money, we'll have money, we'll pay you with that money that you printed on behalf. So if the government just printed $1 million for all of us and gave us all $1 million, we'd all be millionaires. Problem solved, right? Now what's the problem that it causes? Inflation. And so while you have $1 million now, a bottle of Coca-Cola costs $1,000. So it doesn't really ultimately help. And so just printing money that's worthless causes problems, it doesn't solve problems. Now, we don't expect farmers to understand fiscal policy, but I can tell you it doesn't actually work that way. New England farmers are the hardest hit, because what do they farm in New England? Think back to your essay for the first exam. What kind of crops were they growing in New England? Pumpkins, potatoes, squash, not cash crops. Not making a lot of money off of your pumpkin patch in the fall. I built a corn maze. That's what happened. Okay? In the South, where they grow cash crops, they may actually be making money. Right? But in New England, that's not true. Actually, there's also an economic depression that takes place during this time as well. Wars are boom times followed by bust times because you got too big too fast. So all over New England, especially Massachusetts, farmers are saying, I don't have any money, I'm not really making any money, you didn't really pay me, I can't pay my debts, I can't pay my taxes, the bank's going to foreclose, if I can't pay my taxes, the sheriff's going to come arrest me. They're going to take my land and they're going to then sell it to rich people, speculators. And by the way, who are we paying off with my taxes? Where's my taxes, where's that money going when the government gets it? Who are they paying off? Yeah, rich people themselves. And who owns the bank? Rich people. And so it seems like the system's saying, let's take money from the middle class and give it to the rich. Now, the last time a bunch of farmers got mad about taxes, we had an American Revolution. It's the same people. And they start shaking their fists and saying, I don't like this either. So when the government comes out there to foreclose on you, an angry farmer points a gun at your head and says, get off my land. When the bank comes to foreclose, the same thing happens. And so pretty quickly, we see rebellions breaking out across the states. They all have them. But the most famous, and the one that is on the second exam, is called Shays' Rebellion. So Daniel Shays is a veteran of the United States American Revolution, the United States Army. He's from Western Massachusetts, and he becomes the leader of these guys who are complaining about Massachusetts tax debt policy. Another criticism is we can't pay our debts, you often throw us in jail. We definitely can't pay our debts from jail, so we gotta get rid of debtors' prisons. And so they're not saying we refuse to pay taxes, we refuse to obey the law. What they're saying is work with us here. We don't have any money. Give us some money. You know we can't afford to pay these high taxes. We can pay something lower, but not that. You know I can't make my mortgage. Can we reduce my mortgage payment? They're not deadbeats. They're asking for some room to maneuver. And don't throw me in jail. But when greedy people are in charge, greedy people say, no, we're going to go ahead and do this. We'll just take what you have and we won't worry about it. So Shays and his men, they go around causing problems. Very quickly, they're defeated. Just like Bacon's rebellion didn't last very long. So if Shays' rebellion is on the exam, and it is, the question for us is, it didn't last very long. Why does it matter? And so I'll give you this and we'll be done. It matters because they did a little bit of what they wanted. The government does agree to take some steps back and make it easier. But most importantly, what did the United States government do to stop Shays' rebellion? Nothing. How come? Because it can't. So here, as you've created this country, if it's just going to fall apart from the inside and the U.S. is going to sit back and go, there's not a thing I can do to stop it, does this sound like we've created a good government? And so the failures to stop things like this lead to more and more calls to, we have got to change this government to make it impossible to do that kind of thing. So on this next exam, Shays' Rebellion will be there. Probably not Whiskey Rebellion, probably going to run out of time. But both of them are going to be angry farmers complaining about taxes. So why does Shays matter? Because it shows the weakness of the U.S. to enforce the law, leading to the calls that become the U.S. Constitution. We'll pick up with that next time. See you. Elijah, I need to see you. Here, like, this is good. You do it right now. We'll go straight.
Or no, not chapter 9, chapter 10.
So what are you gonna do?
I'm gonna do today, if that's okay.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, I can, because I don't have a class after.
If you're ready, we can do it.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I studied online, I'm ready.
Okay. I'll meet you upstairs.
Okay.
Are there a lot of them?
No, just, on the short stories, some of the questions were, I'm not even sure how to even answer it. Chief Justice John Marshall's ruling in Worcester versus Georgia didn't really give me much to, I guess I'm not figuring out how to answer whatever questions he put on it. I think it's based on like my own opinion. I'm not sure how to go along with it, because it's talking about Native Nations.
Well, let's go upstairs, we can talk about it, we get them set up for their quizzes, okay?
All right.
Elijah, I'm going to go upstairs.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick.
Okay.
I'll meet you up there.
What time do you guys need, Travis? I don't know.
Yeah, no, she could actually teach outside. Okay.